Calling the meeting of the Arlington Finance Committee to order. I'm going to put off the minutes until after we hear the presentation and discussion with the manager. Peter, please be sure to remind me when we get past that. And we have the latest calendar from this. So as you can see, we're going to have a lot to do. I don't think we're going to have a lot in April. At least I hope not. But please keep April 10th open. What has traditionally happened on the 10th, or at least that second Wednesday, is the House Ways and Means Committee comes out with their numbers. So we need to finalize things. Now, usually we're pretty close on that, but just in case I really need to call the committee to order, if you can please, or together, please keep the 10th open. I don't think we'll need the first week or that Monday or the 8th. So, but we'll see how things go. Okay, the prime purpose tonight is two things. One is to review the long-term plan and changes therein with the manager and the deputy. And then secondly, when we're finished with that, is to go through the warrant and get the manager's office feedback on various articles, especially the ones that he submitted. So with no further ado, Mr. Manager.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think all of you or most of you are familiar with this document. This is our long-range planning document that's been, I think, in existence all the way back to 2004, 2005 with iterations and adjustments over time. So what you have before you tonight is two versions of this plan that have most recently been shown and discussed at the Long-Range Planning Committee. And one version is the base of what had been included in the budget book that we submitted on January 15th with updated local aid figures from the governor's budget that was released several weeks ago. The other one that you see, I should say the one that I just described is called governor's budget at the bottom of the sheet. The other sheet is the governor's budget, but with the school department's new 5-year expenditure request included in the plan. So you'll be able to see the differences between both the baseline and then the plan with the school department's requests. But with that said, I'll ask Sandy to walk through the details of these, and then obviously happy to have a dialogue about them.
So I will start with the one that says at the bottom left-hand corner, based on Governor's 2020 budget, this was as of February 6th. This was presented to the Long Range Planning Committee. And probably the most significant thing about this long range plan that's different from the one that is published in this book is that between the time this was published and this long range plan came out, as Adam was just saying, the governor came out with a budget. And in that budget, he had a very significant change in funding for Chapter 70, the education funding across the state. There was a foundation budget review committee that was put together a number of years ago to look at the fundamentals of funding education in Massachusetts, and specifically the formulas that are used to account for what it costs cities and towns to educate students in each of the 351 cities and towns. There had been criticism for many years that that formula undercounted the true cost of education in 3 areas specifically. One, there were formulas built in to estimate the cost of health insurance, but those estimates didn't reflect the actual costs of providing health insurance to teachers and staff. The second was the cost of educating English language learners, and the third was just looking at accounting for poverty, poor children. I guess I should say there's a fourth, and that was special education, adequately looking at those costs. So the Foundation Review Committee made out a number of recommendations. The governor made a small step toward addressing some of those last year, but this year he came out with a comprehensive plan over the next 5 years to add about $1 billion to education aid across the Commonwealth, about $200 million a year, over and above what had been the baseline for education. When you tweak those formulas, the effect of those formulas is going to differ from city and town for all the 351 cities and towns. So depending on whether you're a town that's had large enrollment increases or large sped populations or higher than average health insurance costs and so forth and so on, there's a varying degree of impact. For Arlington, the impact was quite significant and quite positive. We overall had about $2 million more in Chapter 70 aid under the governor's budget than we had from the previous year, from FY19. We are probably one of the larger increases in Chapter 78 across the Commonwealth. So it was a bit of a surprise for us. It was a nice surprise. And it meant, as you look at the very top of the sheet here, you see state aid estimated for FY 2020 at $22,271,000, which is an increase of $2,231,466, or in other words, an 11% increase. Most of that is Chapter 78. There's also a couple $100,000 in there because the governor has kept his promise over the last few years to increase our unrestricted general government aid by the same amount that they are estimating that general overall state revenues are going to go up, which this year he estimated at 2.7%. So we had estimated a 1% increase in unrestricted general government aid, and the governor almost tripled that for us. So that was a nice increase. Just a couple of other areas in the revenue side I want to highlight. Back in the fall, long before the governor's budget came out, the Long Range Planning Committee decided to increase the reliance on local receipts by looking at what the trend has been for our intake of local receipts. Specifically, the biggest one has been increases in the motor vehicle excise tax over the years. And so that and a slight tweaking of the revenue from licenses and permits means that we had a jump of $700,000 in FY20 in our reliance on local receipts. We think it's still a conservative number, but there had been a lot of talk on the Long Range Planning Committee to try to make it more accurate in terms of the historical results. We also had a very big free cash number, a big certification at the end of FY18. So of $11 million, which is the highest it had been for many years. And that meant there's almost $1 million increase in free cash in the budget. And so that made a long way to help balance the 2020 budget. And property taxes are generally going up by what they go up by under 2.5. Built into that is some of the increase that you see from debt exclusions starting to kick in from both the Minuteman High School and some of the local debt exclusions for our own projects. Overall, it means that we have a $7 million increase in revenue this year, about 4.34%. There is a decreased reliance in the 2020 budget on the override stabilization fund of a little more than $500,000. Again, that's really because there was such a big bump in state aid. So let me just stop here before I get into going into the expense side and ask if there are any questions at this point.
So, any questions on the revenue side? Doesn't mean we can't come back to it, but, okay, Sandy?
Sure. The expense side is pretty much what it is every year. There are no big changes. There was nothing about the governor's budget on this sheet that changes anything on the expense side. So overall, the school budget went up by the fundamental drivers of a 3.5% increase in general education costs. Added on top of that as the previous year's growth factor for factoring in what it costs to educate the new students and the enrollment growth that's gone on in town, which means there's overall a $2.4 million increase in general education costs. Special education went up by $1.5 million. That goes up by 7% every year. It just built in as a factor in the long-range plan. And then the growth factor for this year's crop of new students was $1 million. When you factor all those increases in, there's a $4 million increase in the school budget, or an overall increase of 6.2%. And that level of increase pretty much continues into the future because we continue to see enrollment increases that are laid out at the bottom of the sheet here. As when they took the number in this last October for enrollment increases, there was 210 more students in the system than there had been the previous year. We are one of the 5 largest communities with the 5 largest increases in enrollment in the state in the last 10 years, and over a 25% increase in our enrollment in the last 7 years. So that has been a huge driver for these increases.
Is that by number or percentage?
By percentage.
Okay, since the school is such a big piece here, questions on what Sandy went through on the schools? Annie?
So the 7% growth factor on special education, is that working? Is that about what it's increasing every year, or are they finding themselves still in deficits?
Or the other way.
Or the other way, yeah.
So there has not been a comprehensive re-examination of that number. I do know that I believe that the school is prepared this year to take some money that they will surplus from special education and put it into a special education stabilization fund that has been set up that they can put money into on their own. That it was something that we set up differently under state law over the last couple of years, and they will be doing that this year because they have, whatever they budgeted internally for that, they've been able to save some money this year, so that if they hit bumps in future years, they can draw down that stabilization fund. It had pretty much been drawn down to zero recently, so it does fluctuate a little bit from year to year, and they do have the capacity to deal with that with that stabilization fund. And they have not come back to the long-range planning committee asking for that number to be re-examined.
Right, and you haven't felt compelled to re-examine it to see whether we can lower it?
No.
Okay.
Maybe we'll get into that when we talk about the other sheet, but,
Yeah,
okay? Okay.
Anybody else on the schools? Okay, Sandy?
Thank you. So then the next big line is for Minuteman at $5.3 million. That is a $447,000 increase, or 6.2%. Almost all of that increase is because of the new debt service that is hitting us for building the school, as they have sold their bonds there. The operating side, I think, is an increase of only about 2.5% for overall Minuteman operations.
Amount of time, so our words reasonable amount of time proved to be, smart. So I just wanted everyone to remember everyone where we were with that historically.
Okay, other questions? Charlie?
Is the Wheelabrator contract a waste energy contract?
It is,
Is it waste
yes.
energy?
Yeah.
So is there any impact on those rates arising from all the changes in the energy markets, now that the U.S. is producing natural gas and oil and stuff like that?
So I haven't heard anything in the markets or talking to colleagues about solid waste tonnage going up unexpectedly or by percentages that are larger than the norm. And when our contact at Wheelabrator reached out, it's only very sort of loose, but he said, I think we have numbers that would be beneficial to you and to Wheelabrator. So there was no sense of a challenge there. So, but until I see what their initial offer is, it's hard for me to say.
Thank
Okay, any other questions on the first spreadsheet?
Yeah.
Oh, Andy.
So I got two. To follow up on Charlie's question about solid waste, can you remind me what the escalator is in our current contract? Like, how much does it go up every year?
So for the hauling, and so the
Yeah.
JRM contract goes up 2% a year.
Yep.
And I believe the escalator for the tipping fee, I believe, is 2.5% a year.
Okay.
Yeah, 2.5%.
And then remind me when we fully fund the pension, which year?
We're at 2036 right now. Is that right?
I think so,
Yep.
yes.
Okay, okay, go to the next one.
So, the next one, the top looks the same. The revenue doesn't change, or the fundamentals, other than that there is going to be a change in the use of the override stabilization fund, because if you go down to the school department operating budget, there's a line that has a big red draft next to it that says school additions. So these are preliminary numbers from the school committee. They have not formally submitted this. They are still working on them from what we are told. But they have a plan over time where they want to inject about $9 million into the school budget to meet various needs. And so under this long-range plan, what I did is just added a new line on top of the other lines and added them to the school budget. And then the way I did this is I then took whatever additions they had in any particular year and put it into the base for the following year, and had it go up 3.5%, which they tell me that maybe I shouldn't have done that. That they factored that in already, which is all the more reason to say that this is a draft. It's still a work in progress. But what you can see, the immediate impact of this additional spending is that in FY22 we now have a $15 million deficit, where it basically moves up the year when we're going to have a deficit in town by 1 year because of this additional spending and its compounding over time. All the other spending assumptions on this are the same as you've seen in the previous version. All the other revenue assumptions are the same. But what happens is that the override stabilization fund gets eaten into much more quickly than it had been in the previous version. So just to compare, the override stabilization fund in the previous version, it starts in going into FY20 with $21 million. In the previous version, it stays at about $21 million for various reasons, mostly because of new state aid. But then the balances quickly start to go down and are eaten up by the end of FY21. So there's not really much more to say about this than that, and that we, if we start spending more money right away on the school department budget, it will have a major impact on when we need to have an override, if an override is the way we're going to get out of this conundrum. We have had some presentation by the school department of what some of those requests or needs are, but I can't go into it in fine detail because it still is a draft on their part. So at some point, I'm sure they'll be coming to you to tell you about what they're looking for. We can try to answer whatever general questions about their increases you may have.
And I'll just add that we met on February 6th. We plan to meet again at the end of February as a long-range planning committee, and then meet again in March to continue to talk through these numbers, run a number of scenarios to see what impacts would be about at various funding levels and also various expectation levels of what state aid might actually be after it goes through the House and the Senate. So as we continue to work through that process with the Long Range Planning Committee, we'll be able to come back here and talk with this committee about what the ultimate budget recommendation will be coming out of the Long Range Planning Committee to the Select Board as it contemplates an override in June.
Questions? Yeah.
So in the governor's budget, the total amount that would be in the hole through fiscal '24 is about 33 million. And with this, the school additions, that amount we're in the hole is over 70 million. So what's,
So part of it is that you've got an extra year to account for in the school additions budgets, because there'll still be a huge number of a deficit in FY '25 under the first. This all relies on how long we can have the override stabilization fund stretch out. And so as we're eating into it much more quickly, if we increase the school budget that way, then those deficits just grow a lot.
so there's a real multiplier effect.
Well, so what happens is that every time you put in a new school addition, that amount is cumulative into the next year. So if you look at the school's bottom line from FY '24 to their proposed bottom line in '20, it's going up by $25 million. Or maybe even more starkly, if you look at FY '24 and the school additions plan, and look at FY '20 and the non-school additions plan, it's actually, presented as going up by $28 million. So there's a significant, when you compound that year over year, there's a big growth in the deficit.
Okay. John?
And is part of that, Sandy, because of your assumption that when it goes into the next year's budget, it then is increased by an additional 3.5%?
That's right. So at some point they will give me new numbers which I can plug in here, and these were the numbers I had to work with when they gave them to me. And so it may not multiply as much, but I think part of this is just to give us a sense of scale and when we start to run out of money.
Other questions? Charlie?
Just an observation, Sandy, you said that the school department was looking to put $9 million into the budget before, right?
Right.
It's really the difference between 33 million and 70 million, right?
Right, because the first year's 3 is there for all of the years. So there's 3 in the first year, and that same 3 then gets added as part of the base for the next year. So it's $3 million in the first year times 5 over the next year's plan, and $2 million times 4 over the next year's plan, because it's, once you put it in, it's in there for all of the years.
I think they would say that there's $9 million in new spending over the course of the plan versus the cumulative impact, which is obviously much larger.
Other questions? Okay, as you can see, there's quite an impact, even if a few items are double counted
So
on this.
Can I add one thing?
Sure.
So I do want to mention we're in, it's an interesting political time on Beacon Hill right now in terms of school funding. So Sandy explained what the governor's budget did. And in any normal year, when a governor's budget comes out, absent a recession hitting after the release of the governor's budget, usually you can count on the legislature to either keep those local aid numbers the same or even increase them, because no one wants to look worse than the person who came before them in terms of putting out local aid numbers. However, this year there's still a lot of debate about the formula and about whether the governor's proposed formula under the Foundation Budget Review Commission is the right way to do it. Mayor Walsh has offered an alternative called the Promise Act, which does very well for Boston, but also for other communities. And that may or may not get traction and may or may not be more or less beneficial to Arlington. One of the competing interests in all of this are communities that have a charter school issue, so to speak, and communities that don't have charter school issues. We fall into the category of not really having a charter school issue. There are some communities, I think Boston is the poster child for this. I think the stat is that they get basically net negative Chapter 70 after they pay all of their charter school tuitions. So they're very interested in having there be some type of charter school reform. So the Promise Act includes funding reform for charter school impacted districts, which we wouldn't be the beneficiaries of. So there'll be a lot of jockeying over the next few months on Beacon Hill about what exactly the formula should look like to distribute the new money that's been pumped into education aid at the local level. So I think one way or the other, we will do well coming out of a final budget. But again, as compared to years past, I don't think we should see the ink as dry on that $2 million increase for Arlington. It could be 1.7, 1.5. There's still more to know before we know what that number is. So when the House budget comes out on April 10th, or thereabouts, that will be our next sort of guidepost as to what's happening on the Hill. But I think it's worth putting it out there that, again, in most years we would just say, yeah, that's what the number is. We're going to be somewhere close to that. It's not so certain this year.
Okay, any other questions? John?
I thought it was interesting, the other day, the mayor was on Jim Barry, Marjorie Egan's show, and he stated that his budget for Boston laid out a third of the total budget for schools. It kind of surprised me, given that we put out more than half for our schools. You have any thoughts about that? It just struck me as a really big difference between Boston and here. Is there a reason that I don't understand why that should be the case? I mean, I would think that.
I would say for a lot of towns, it's not unusual for the school department budget to be 70 or 75%, particularly in smaller towns where they don't have a lot of other services. So I think you're going to have to look at what the proportion of students to the overall population is. I mean, if you look at Cambridge, for example, they have a much bigger population, but proportionally much smaller school population. So I don't know what the numbers are for Boston, but
So it would depend on the school population.
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, so if you look at Arlington, say we're 40 or 50%, you go out to Acton or Medfield, and it's probably 60, 70%. And if you go out to the more rural areas where literally they don't have a police force, a volunteer fire department, and their biggest town expenditure is public works, their school budget could be 80%. So, okay, other questions? Charlie?
Yeah, I just would point out, as I recall, in the mid and late 1970s, we had a school population of 10,000 students.
Correct.
But the school budget proportion of the total budget of the town was substantially less than 50%. It was about 40% or 38% or something like that. And that seems to have changed dramatically. We've had fewer students and a higher percentage of the budget.
And I think a lot of that has to do with the state mandates for special education, English language learners, low-income students, various populations. So it's not, I think a lot of it is driven by statute or state regulation that has guided the programs that have to be offered. Probably not entirely, but to some degree.
And that doesn't count the soon-to-be $400 or $500 million we spent on school buildings.
Correct.
Okay, so you can see there's some major issues to be discussed and decided on that. And so next step is looking at what the long-term planning committee discusses and decides on to recommend. And then the other big thing is the House Ways and Means Committee coming out on April 10th. So we'll keep thinking about this. And I'm sure the manager and the Board of Selectmen will be looking for your feedback. Okay, with this, what I'd like to do now is go through the warrant.
Sure.
There's a substantial number of articles, like 30 more, I think more than 30 more. And after we get past zoning, we get into bylaws. So I think we started, the first article that was asked about is 35. And so this is a select board put this in. So the short-term rental regulations, and I believe there's also a short-term rental fund that's been requested. So these all deal with Airbnb and those type. If you, do you have any
Correct, yeah.
background you could add to us?
Yeah, I'm looking for the other article, but yeah, there's two articles on the warrant. One to discuss regulations regarding things like Airbnb, short-term rentals, and another to adopt the local option taxes that have just been allowed by the state.
It's
So-
Article 50,
Thank you.
short-term rental impact fee.
So Article 50 was heard by the Select Board on Monday, and they voted favorably to adopt both options that any city or town can adopt for short-term rental impact fees or local taxes. The differences are basically people that rent out their properties professionally. They don't live there and they just own properties and rent them out. And also people that live in the property but rent out space in the property, both via something like an Airbnb or VRBO. The board voted favorably to adopt both of those impact fees. We've not taken up Article, sorry, I'm all crossed up here, Article 35 yet. But our goal would be to put reasonable regulations in place. Try to get some sense of exactly how many short-term rentals there are in Arlington. We don't really have a good sense right now. And then be able to have that impact fee collected from them once we have a sense of where they are.
Alan?
Actually, maybe it's something else. I'd like to back up into the zoning articles and just ask a question in general about those.
Okay.
Well, okay, basically, I think there's 19 zoning articles, and from what you've looked at, are there any that might have a large financial impact, either in terms of tax revenue or extra costs or whatever? You know? Or should we just, like you say, let's ignore those, or should we be looking at some of those?
Well, I think so I'll say, first of all, there's so many articles rather than one or two or even just 3 or 4 omnibus articles, because strategically, these are all, could be considered to be controversial. And rather than have an entire proposal fail, we chose to rather pursue each individually and hope they all succeed, but if only some succeed, not lose everything that we'd like to achieve by having them all in one article. So that's why there's so many articles. But what they really are looking to achieve is to be able to stimulate or create that growth on the commercial corridors, Mass Ave and Broadway, that we had hoped would have started to happen when we passed mixed-use zoning 3 years ago now. We have seen some mixed-use permits, but based on some limitations in that zoning, we haven't seen as many permits as we'd like to have seen. So a lot of this is about stimulating that growth. It's also about growing affordable housing opportunities and just housing opportunities in Arlington in general.
Is there any broad guesses on the impact on property tax revenue, let's say, on new growth?
So I think the answer is I don't have a number to share with you. The planning department has been working for some time on a build-out analysis, but there would be not insignificant growth in the property tax revenue if we started to densify the commercial corridor.
And I just feel like if there's substantial financial implications that, we should
talk about it.
maybe look at them, but it's like, it's pretty vague and broad, and it's hard to figure it out. But if anyone's thought about that, maybe the planning department, I guess I'd like to hear what they might be. If it's
Yep.
a $10 million a year increase, we'd like to know about that.
Yep.
Maybe instead of an override, we could do new growth.
Okay, so any other questions on the zoning in general? When do you anticipate the planning department might have some financial analysis of the impact?
I would probably by early April we'll try to have something that we can share when they're finishing up their hearings and when the ARB is finishing up their hearings.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions on that? Okay, back to short-term rentals. Any questions here?
I guess the question written down, sorry, on Article 35, would there be any impact on the inspection budget if there are new regulations?
So I don't, I don't anticipate that. I think the number is small enough that it's something we can handle within the existing staffing.
Okay, so we really don't have a handle yet on the number of short-term rentals that will be impacted by the regulations.
No, it's quite hard when you look at the app, when you look at Airbnb. It's very dependent on what dates you put in and what's available. So I've heard people estimate that there's 40 or so Airbnb properties in Arlington, and then I've heard other people estimate that they've seen hundreds. It's probably neither. It's probably somewhere in between, but it's hard to get one concrete number for how many properties there are that folks rent out.
Now, with the regulation, the law that was passed by the legislature and signed by the governor, I know the governor was pushing that if you rent out less than 2 weeks during the calendar year, the regulations or the fees didn't apply to them?
There is still a date in there. I think it might actually be for if you live in the property, it's more than 31 days. But if you're just a commercial property owner, there's no time. There's no time frame.
Okay, so it only applies to people who actually live there.
I believe that's the case. I'd have to verify that, but I think so.
Okay, are there other, so Article 50, which is the impact fees, the Board of Selectmen has voted basically to adopt both. Now, are these general fund receipts?
Yes.
Okay. Are there questions on any of the Airbnb, Article 35 and 50? Okay. When do you anticipate the?
Grant.
Oh, I'm sorry, Grant.
Just trying to phrase it. On Article 50, the community impact fee, is that a flat fee, or would that be based on the amount of the rental income?
It'll be a percentage of the rental.
So that's why it's more important. So the factor or the function to determine this would be actually number of rental days, right? Not just number of units, but the actual number of rental days, number of units times available days to come up with.
Oh, to come up with an estimate, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
I have
Okay.
a question on 37.
Okay, Charlie, 37?
So, why are we moving the police chief from civil service? Didn't we put the police chief back on civil service 5 years ago or 10 years ago? When we had them in the normal management schedule, and Chief Ryan wanted to be Chief Ryan and not whatever it was, Manager Ryan.
Director.
And,
So there's
and there was a, I mean, does this have a financial impact? What is the whole concept here? And will it be applied to the fire department as well?
So I don't believe there's any financial impact. I think it's a management, just a management issue of how we choose to manage various personnel. It actually was almost 20 years ago that what you're describing occurred, and what really happened was there. At one point, a prior town manager created a Department of Community Safety, and had a Director of Community Safety. And under that person, there was an Assistant Director of Community Safety for Fire Services and an Assistant Director of Community Safety for Police Services. And those people basically functioned as the two chiefs, but they were not the chiefs. The person who was the first Director of Community Safety retired. There was never another Director of Community Safety. The town manager, Mr. Marquis, took on the dual role of Town Manager and Director of Community Safety, and then had these two assistant directors for police and fire services. In some ways, I believe that was a strategy to get around civil service without actually asking to remove the position from civil service. So at some point in time, after Chief Ryan was hired, it became apparent to him that he had no real legal standing in the role because he was not really the chief of police. And the town had never removed the position from civil service because the town meeting would have to take a vote to remove it, and town meeting never did that. But he was in this, and at that time, I think it was I'm going to get the fire chief's name wrong, but whoever the fire chief was at that time was in the same situation. So town meeting was asked to reaffirm that the police chief and the fire chief were actually civil service chiefs, not to put it back in to civil service. Now, it's a long time ago, but I think you can make an argument that Fred Ryan should have never been the police chief because he wasn't legally hired as a civil service chief here in Arlington. Now, obviously the town was the tremendous beneficiary of getting Fred Ryan through that process, but the civil service process is a very limiting process where internal candidates take a test or go through an assessment center, get scores, and then the appointing authority, in this case the town manager, chooses from the top 3 scores. And if they go below the top score, has to provide bypass reasons for the people who scored above the person that they select. So that's that's the history of what happened.
Excuse me, Adam?
Yeah.
Just respectful. Going back to when that started, originally the fire chief at that time took a leave of absence from that position and became Director of Community Safety. The next fellow that stepped in to be was the Assistant Director of Community Safety / Fire. That was French. On the police side, there had been a standing police exam in effect for chief. The 3 individuals, it was a certified police exam. It was O'Leary, Doherty, and Carroll. The job was offered to O'Leary, Captain O'Leary, but he refused the job because the position was not going to be a civil service position. Subsequently, they ended up giving the position to Lieutenant John Carroll. Once he got the position, he then appealed to civil service and said, Arlington has had a current exam, it's been posted, it's certified. What am I in the eyes of civil service? They said you have a chief's rating. The fire didn't have that. Although, as far as that community safety concept, he was the acting Director of Community Safety, but for civil service purposes, he had a chief's rating. So around here, we didn't know whether we call him boss, director, but that, and then when he retired, John Carroll, the next position was Eugene Delgazo, who was a captain, but he took the position of acting Director of Community Safety / Police. Meantime, Director Bloomquist retired. He retired, but he did not retire as Community Safety Director. He went back for one day and retired as Fire Chief under the Civil Service rating. Because of the pension purposes, it was better for him to do that. Since then, you cannot do that under pension reform. You can't do that anymore. To take a leave of absence, go back. And then that's when manager at the time, Mr. Marquis, became Director of Community Safety. There was a third part to it. The third part was, it was a triangle, police, fire, and building inspector, made up of the triad. On the building inspector side, the building inspector at the time, because he was part of the NAGI, refused to go to town meeting unless was compensated for each time he went. So very seldom at town meeting would you ever see the building inspector. All department heads were there, but the building inspector, unless you're paying. And that was a court case adjudicated in his favor. So that was part of the history of that. And now when Chief Ryan came, the ranking officer on the police side, one position to go back in civil service. But you don't have to call for exam. It was really never taken out of civil service. And here comes chief, he gets the chief rating. Likewise, automatically, the fire chief got chief. The fire chief at the time was, I can't remember. I can picture him.
Okay.
But,
So what,
so that's the history of it. So one was actually, it was kind of crazy because he had a chief's rating, but he wasn't chief, if you will.
so if this article does not pass, what would be the process you have to go through to hire a new chief?
So can I finish answering Charlie's questions and
Sure.
then answer that? So why do I think it's best to take it out?
And what's the impact?
So I think I know I want to take it out because I think the police chief is probably the most visible and important to hold accountable department head position in the entire town. And it's a very visible position, and with civil service, there are tremendous protections over that person in terms of their job security. So should you have a chief that is not meeting the goals or following the policies of either the select board or the manager, they would be very hard to manage or potentially remove from the position under civil service. And not that any employee should be easy to remove, but you want to be able to hold direct accountability over your police chief. You probably, throughout all of history, you should have been able to. In today's day and age, you certainly should be able to hold a strong degree of accountability over your police chief from a community point of view. From the front end point of view, I think on a long-term basis, having as wide a pool as possible to recruit a police chief is for the betterment of the organization. If we're successful in taking it out of civil service, I've already committed to the select board that for the first hire, we would stay within the department to try to create continuity in the department. But I think long-term, having flexibility to be able to hire whoever you could deem as the best candidate from a broad pool puts the town in a better position. To the last question of why not fire, I think why not fire, or at least why not fire now, is there are tremendous differences in the level of civil liability or just general liability that a police chief in the dispatch of his or her duties is responsible for versus a fire chief. And there's also a greater range of potential policy disagreements between the governing board and the manager of a community and a police chief, and there is with a fire chief. I've actually talked this through the fire chief, even though he doesn't agree with me about the civil service matter. There's not a lot to really disagree about with a fire chief that can't be settled by a third party. If you disagree with your fire chief about staffing, town meeting can settle it based on funding. But aside from that, there's not a lot of argument about whether or not ambulances should be dispatched or fires should be extinguished. It's a pretty straightforward service. Whereas policing, there's a much bigger difference in whether or not you believe in de-escalation or procedural justice or restorative justice or more progressive policing policies versus less progressive policing policies. So I feel pretty strongly that having, again, accountability and governing body level control over the types of policies that a police chief is going to implement is really critical to the success of the organization. So should it fail, what we would do is call for a test, which would be a test quasi-assessment center, and go forward with hiring somebody via that process. If this was to pass, we would have to file home rule legislation with the legislature. They'd have to then pass that. And then we'd really follow the same process. We would perform an assessment center and we would rank candidates, but we just wouldn't be under the exact strictures of the civil service process in terms of the selection of that candidate.
Can you hire, John, why don't you go?
I was just gonna say, that means a fairly significant delay, maybe a year, right?
Correct.
Go through the legislature and all?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Charlie?
So what is the financial impact? In other words, if we're hiring a chief through the civil service set boundaries on the compensation?
No.
No. So on that side, it's always up to the board of selectmen or the town meeting?
Ultimately, town meeting.
Town meeting,
Yep.
and so nothing changes there?
Correct, that's correct.
What about the benefits that the individual receives whether it's pension or.
All,
It's all the
same in either.
So, and then the title of chief is, and whatever authority and responsibilities that it entails is also the same?
They would remain the same. Sort of the inside lingo would be a civil service chief versus a contract chief, is how you would describe it. Though statute allows both civil service chiefs and contract chiefs to have employment contracts or employment agreements.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions on this? Can you, under civil service, if this article weren't there, can you hire outside the town? Can somebody from Concord apply?
You can do something called an open competitive exam, where other people, other qualifying officers from out of town could take the civil service exam. Not many communities have done that, so there's not a lot of experience to look at to see how well that worked out.
Okay.
Yeah, if you will.
Sorry, Grant?
The town of Arlington, most people think the first time they went out of Arlington was when they hired Fred Ryan, but that's not correct. If you go back in history of the police department, they hired Chief Burkhardt out of the Wakefield Police Department. That then came here. So it wasn't the first time, it had done previously.
Okay. Grant?
I follow the, kind of with you on the qualified candidate pool, and opens up a little bit. But then the thought crossed my mind, well, you know, that might be how I'm thinking, but I'm not the candidate. So does that actually, could that actually backfire in a way that more qualified candidates might not be interested because of the category of not being civil service? Because all the they want to be.
Well, absent pursuing the open competitive process, outside applicants can't apply via civil service. So you can't, people can't be dissuaded because they wouldn't be able to do it. If you're an outside candidate, civil service limits it to your department.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, so basically there's no financial impact one way or the other
I don't believe
on
so.
this article?
I don't believe so.
Okay. So we did 35. The next article that there was was Article 38, again, selectmen. So we're talking about several tax deferrals. You also have 43 and 44. Is there a particular person on the selectmen who might be interested in, basically we want to know what the impact is from having a greater senior tax deferment or having means test tax relief. What kind of money are we talking about? The desire obviously is with the debt exclusion and then a possible override coming up to reduce the impact on senior citizens. But is there any information now about the impact, financial impact? Are we talking 10,000 townwide, 50,000?
People?
Impact.
Yeah. So for
Dollars.
Article 38 is really a follow-up to an article that was passed last year. So last year, town meeting voted favorably to file a piece of home rule legislation to allow us to set, or to allow the town to set a higher limit than is allowed by state statute to qualify for the tax deferral program. So statute, I believe, allows the total household income to qualify for property tax deferral. The cap is $57,000. I think Lexington's is $70,000, so we were trying to follow Lexington in that regard. So the second step in that is going back to town meeting to have them set that limit. So we don't have a proposal yet for the limit, but it will likely be in that $70-some thousand range as Lexington adopted. There's really no budgetary impact to that because you do collect this money at the transfer of the piece of property. So when the property sells, you collect all of that deferred taxes. So there's no redistribution of that burden to other taxpayers. If you jump down to Article 43, this is an article that we filed last year but decided not to move forward with just based on timing and not having time to get a proposal ready. But this is based on a program that I believe Concord, Sudbury, and Lexington also have, where they set a cap for certain qualifying individuals for what the maximum amount of property tax they could pay is. So it's like the state's income circuit breaker program. So for round numbers' sake, you would say that a person of certain means, assets and income eligibility, their property tax bill would be capped at $5,000. That's just a round. That's not the real number, just a round number. And if their real tax bill was $8,000, that $3,000 needs to be distributed amongst the rest of the taxpayers. So every other tax exemption program we have is paid for out of the overlay account, the money we set aside for abatements. This would be the first time that there's sort of a redistributive nature to a tax exemption or a tax reduction program. So we still have to build out those numbers to see what we want it to look like for Arlington. But I think I can speak for the select board in its entirety that they see this as a means of balancing some of the equity issues for people living in the community on fixed incomes, but who want to stay in their homes, and maybe even want to support the funding of the schools in the town, but don't want to be priced out of their homes based on tax increases. So we still have to quantify the impacts, but that's the general concept of what we're looking at.
Okay, and then, so on those two articles, are there any questions? Annie?
If we're gonna do a tax cap for a means-tested senior citizen, what are we doing for people in similar circumstances who are less than 65 years of age? Like, why is it only seniors that we're means testing for this purpose?
It's a fair question. I don't know that there's any community that has gone beyond seniors, but I think it's a fair thing. It's a fair thing for us to look at.
Okay, John?
Look at it.
I mean, it's not on the board's mandate right now, and I mean, we could look at numbers, given. Well, I think I'd have to look at numbers to really get a sense of whether or not, how impactful you could be if you
Right,
pursue
I mean, I'm
something.
thinking of people who are on, SSI disability or, some other fixed income where you can say, this cannot be improved upon.
Yeah.
So,
John?
There was a bylaw a couple years ago about seniors volunteering and reducing their tax bill that way. Did that have any revenue impact, and are there people volunteering?
There is. So we fund that. I think there's a separate
Yes, the Harry
article in
Barber.
here that funds that program. So we actually have two. We have the Harry Barber program where we pay them, and then we have another program where we set aside money to defer or defray their taxes. That comes out of abatement too.
That
right?
comes out of the
overlay. That comes out of the overlay too. So it's sort of, we have a budgeted figure, so there's no bottom line revenue impact to it.
And there are about a dozen people who did it this last year.
What do they do?
They volunteered at they just worked in various offices around the town.
They're not shoveling sidewalks.
is it useful?
Okay.
It is. It's a good program. Yes.
Christine?
When you're looking at the numbers to analyze Article 43, what are the numbers you're looking at and where are you getting them?
So the first thing we'll do is look at what the other communities have done. Those communities aren't exactly like us, but they're not so dissimilar that they won't be a good start. So I think we have to look at two things. We have to figure out what the right means in income test or asset and income test is to figure out how big of a qualifying population is appropriate. Then on the other side, I think we have to, if we can get a sense of where that population is, see where we want to set that property tax limit to figure out what the impact would be in terms of redistribution.
But wouldn't you need to know individual means to get an accurate sense of the impact of this?
I don't understand what you mean.
Well,
Would you have to know ahead of time how many people are at a certain income
Oh, yeah,
level?
we'd have to get the best data that we could find, which is admittedly hard to get, about how many people there are at certain income levels, and then make some assumptions about their property ownership status.
and you're saying that you look at other communities to ballpark that.
Correct.
Okay. Dean?
On Article 38, just to more fully understand the impact, I think one thing that would be helpful is if we could get our highly competent treasurer, who replaced Bozo, to give us the number of people who currently have deferrals. Because I think one of the things, because if you remember, one of the things we did, we actually lowered the interest rate. And I think one of the things that's shocking we would find is how few people actually avail themselves of deferrals. So even, I mean, it's a big number. The limits have been increased over the years. The interest rate on the deferral has been lowered. And it's not like that created a mushroom like of explosion of people that do deferrals. It's a very small number. Person Bozo used to be treasurer.
Like 10?
Yeah.
I mean, in general, my understanding is it's a very small number of people who pursue any of the exemption or tax programs that are available via the assessor's office.
Yeah, most people that ask about it, at least in an 18-month period where I looked at it, usually ended up just selling and moving because they realized it wasn't worth it.
Okay, other people. Bill?
I just seem to remember last year when these articles came up, very similar articles that we're seeing now, that a good go-to person was Bob Riccia. Is that how you pronounce his name? In other words, these were inserted on the request of Bob Radicchia, Radosha, and 10 voters. And so at the time, it just seemed like there was not a significant amount of revenue or money at stake or involved in any three of these. It's my recollection, I can go back to the articles from last year and look at my notes, but that would be helpful before we decide how we're going to vote.
Okay, are there any other questions on 38 and 43? Obviously, 45 is a 10 register voter. Home rule legislation to exempt the surcharge for senior homeowners. Doesn't have him. Do you know if the person's putting a means test on this?
No. So just have to live in town for 10 years and be over 65. So the select board voted unfavorably on this Monday night.
Gee, that sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, I support that.
In the same hall? In the same hall or in the same?
Okay. Okay, so Article 38, basically, over the long term, there's no impact because eventually you'll collect the taxes.
Correct.
Article 43, there would be no town impact because whatever money is reduced off the poor seniors gets distributed to everybody else.
Correct.
Okay, 46. Okay. Acceptance of legislation, establishment of commission on disability. Now, right now we appropriate $3,000 to the Commission on Disability in the committees and commissions article. I'm trying to remember the last time the commission came before us. Here what they're attempting to do is to take money that goes into the general fund and give it directly to them so they can do things, thereby bypassing town meeting. Is that a fair?
Not entirely. Accurate up to the point of bypassing town meeting. So what the Disabilities Commission would like to do is take the revenue that is generated by handicap parking violation tickets being issued and then fines being collected. It's just about $30,000 a year, and have that go into this Disabilities Commission fund so that they could invest in accessibility infrastructure and technologies in town, improving assistive listening devices in various town departments or in town buildings, looking at whether or not they could supplement already existing capital programming for pedestrian infrastructure, and looking at where they could start to have an impact on improving accessibility in town. But they would have to go back before town meeting. At least it's my understanding is they have to go back before town meeting. It has to be appropriated, to be expended.
Okay.
In fact, yeah, by the way this reads, I think we could make them go back before town meeting.
But they could do it now under the our commissions and committees article.
Yeah, you could make that argument, yeah, yes.
Questions?
What happens if they don't spend it? Or if town meeting says you can't spend it?
Well, I guess if town meeting said you could spend it, that would be a predicament, but in general, it would be a fund that's able to roll over from year to year. It wouldn't close and roll back into the general fund.
Sorry?
Why do you want to balkanize more of the general revenues? Are you in favor of this?
I guess I'm supportive of the Disabilities Commission taking initiative to try to meet the goals that they've laid out. I didn't file it, so I don't want to hedge too much, but I am supportive of them.
I mean, why wouldn't we
pursuing
do this with virtually every other special interest group in the town?
I guess I'm.
There's a state law that allows it.
Yeah, well, and I'm not like, there's not another special interest group that jumps out to me.
Arts communities.
We fund them.
That's different than this.
Yeah, true. The mechanism's different, but we do fund them.
Yeah, I'm not arguing against funding specific programs, but, segregating general fund money as a policy to me seems not a good idea.
I think it's just there's been this mechanism that was set up years ago to allow the disability commissions to grab the handicap parking money, and there at various times, various cities and towns, the disability commissions have come forward to ask to do that. Now it's happening in Arlington, but that structure for segregating those monies for these purposes was sort of unique in the way it was established by state law.
Does this trump the parking laws that we passed the last couple of years for the center, Arlington Center? In other words, you've got a fund that has a call on local.
The fines
So
never
the
went into
fines
that
don't
fund.
go into any of those funds.
Fines
The
are
fines
general.
have gone into the general
Oh,
fund.
it's still going to the
Yep.
general.
I mean, I can't speak for the commission, but if the position of the finance committee was suggesting to them that they pursue a direct appropriation for some certain number of things that they wanted to achieve versus this measure, I would imagine they would be open to that path as an alternative. Again, I can't speak for them without talking to them further, but I think they're just looking for a way to, people come to them, they have things they want to achieve, and you could equally argue, well, why haven't they asked for money? But I think they've seen this as a way of saying, hey, we generate these revenues, like Sandy said, this is a statute that allows us to do this. What a great way for us to get money.
Any other questions on this, John?
This is a little picky, but the word shall be used solely for the benefits of persons with disabilities. Like if you build a sidewalk ramp, a mother with a kid, now I have kids and I might consider them to be disabilities, but not technically. That would not be, I don't know, that word, is that a problem? That word seems a little specific, right? Because
It's got to be right from the statute, but I can't imagine that a handicap curb cut ramp would be a disqualified or an eligible expense under this fund.
Okay, anybody else? Grant? Grant?
So you're saying it's about 30,000. So last year or the year before, was there a request by the Disabilities Commission for funds?
No, not more than the $3,000 that Al mentioned.
Not more?
Not more than the $3,000 sort of administrative budget
Oh,
that Al
okay.
mentioned.
So it's let's say $27,000 difference. How do we make up the shortfall? I mean, it's not a whole big thing, but I mean, isn't that sort of redirecting the money to a different purpose than we would have ordinarily used it?
Yeah, no, it would be, ultimately, it would be reducing general fund revenue by a requisite, the same amount of violations, so by $30,000.
But it's not. Okay, thank you.
Okay, if the committee wants to, again, it's not the manager's article, but the committee wants to, we could ask the Commission on Disability to come in. Annie, did you have a question?
Yeah, so, how how much money, like, have we invested in the kind of equipment that you think that they would? Well, I know we have a system in town hall for hearing, and I know we use CDBG funds to do handicap ramps. Have they articulated things they want to spend money on that they have not?
Hundreds of thousands of dollars.
No, I agree. I'm just saying, is it, I, in some ways I have the same concern Charlie does. I'm less uptight about, excuse me, Charlie. I'm less,
That's a different word.
firm about my concerns about this as a policy, but I see the trend, right? And I understand this is just a law, but what's to keep the next committee from coming along and saying, hey, you know, if we generate revenue for the town, say, you know, arts activity generates restaurant business, we should get some of that money, and then, you know, we're in crazy town. So is it possible to head them off by just sending somebody to talk to them about their plan? Or
Well-
suggesting to them that they should submit a plan to the town manager every year that says what they would like to do?
Well, we can do
And-
that. I mean,
Yeah.
we could have them come in and tell us what they want to do. Has the selectmen taken up this article?
No, no. I mean, I know they have not yet, and I'm not even sure that they're planning on taking it up.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Is there any other questions on 46? Okay, questions, Articles 47 and 48 are on the parking. Appropriation,
No, that's PEG access.
I'm sorry, cable, that's right. Okay, what's 47 and 48?
So this is a matter that we have continued to get, or not that we've had it, but the DOR has been pushing back for a number of years. But ultimately, the state wants us to appropriate all the money that we collect via our cable contracts for public education and government television programming, of which ACMi is the major or really sole recipient of. So right now, we have a fund set up. The money's come in from the cable company, and per our agreement with ACMi, the money goes out. What the state wants us to do is just have that run via an appropriation from town meeting. So we'll be working with ACMi to put together a budget, have that come before the finance committee, and then go before a town meeting. It's really no change in anything that happens. It's just the process by which the state wants us to disperse the revenue.
Okay, so right now it goes into this fund and right out to
Just goes directly out.
So now it'll go into this fund and then get reappropriated out by town meeting?
Correct.
Okay, are you gonna have a budget for us?
Yes.
Okay, when do you think that would be
Any sense of that?
ready?
I have no idea. I have not been talking to anybody about this.
I don't, frankly, I don't think it's tremendously complicated to do because we know exactly what the revenues are per the contract and we know what ACMi's budget is. So, mid-March.
Okay, could you arrange with Liz to, a time to come in and if you could shoot us a copy of the budget like a few days ahead of time, that would
Yep.
be really good. It doesn't sound overly complex, but, you know, we just want to be able to look at it and vote on it. Anybody else? Charlie?
So what's the criteria that would be applied here? In other words, will either the town manager or the finance committee or town meeting be looking at the ACMI or some other organization's budget and say, you know, I like this show, but I don't like that show, or some, you know, what is, it almost looks like we're trying to control the media. What is your view on that? How does this work in practice?
So I can't imagine the budget is going to have show-by-show line items. I think it's going to be pretty general operating capital, you know, probably a pretty simple budget based on the monies that we take in. You raise a good point. I mean, I think this is definitely not, I mean, I'll just be honest, this is not work we were looking to do. And I know ACMi is not interested in doing this because it's nice to be able to spend money without appropriation. But I think we finally have reached the year where the state is not giving us a choice about doing this.
What happens if there's another company that wants to run community TV?
So we have to do an RFP every so many years for our local access provider.
Okay.
So that would be the venue for someone else to bid against ACMi, not through this process.
Sandy, did you want
I
to?
was just gonna say, the level of control in the budget could just be a bottom line budget that gets voted at town meeting. There may be backup detail to show how the money is being spent, but it could be like the school budget, you're just voting the number, not, and that's, if that's how it's presented to town meeting, that's how it'll be voted.
Okay, so Sandy, if you could let Liz know when you're ready and set up a time. We're trying to avoid the last week in March. No hearings the last week in March, so try to do it at a time before that, please.
Yep.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Alan?
What are the implications, if 47 fails, what's the implication? Does the money dry up, or does it stay, or status quo?
I mean, I suppose the implication is we would still collect the funds, but it would be illegal for us to transmit them to ACMi for them to expend them. I think that would be the impact.
Yeah, this is really, you know, an accountant's rule, not.
Okay, I'm just wondering the implication if it fails, does that shut down ACMI?
Yeah, I think
Oh,
yes,
probably,
yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Is this Division of Local Services pushing us to do
Yes,
this?
yeah.
So is this their policy, or they have hard regulation or law to back it up?
Hard regulation.
Okay.
Can I?
Dean?
Just to clarify, so this already happens. We're not setting up a system, assume that already happens. What happens right now is the town enters into the franchise agreements with the three major cable providers. They each negotiate a fee that they're going to pay the local community access channel to fund it. And then they go off to Congress, to the federal level, and they try to get rid of that fee, okay? That's weird, but whatever. But anyway, so what happens is, they negotiate the fee, and then every year, in the middle of the fiscal year, or after calendar year, ACMI starts to call town hall and ask where their money is, right? So we go, crap, where's their money? So then town goes and they ask him price for the money comes in, and then they send it to ACMI. So all of this has gone on for decades, but it's gone off, it's occurred off the books. It just sort of flows and it happens, right? So all this is really doing is saying it's still gonna happen, it's just going to be formalized and not happening in the background.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay, okay, Article 50 is the short-term rental impact fees, which the selectmen have already voted.
49?
Sorry, 50.
Right, but what about the local option? Are there,
Oh, that's, do you know of any other local option taxes or created by law or regulation that we can adapt?
Outside of the ones that we're addressing in separate articles, no.
okay.
So, the selectmen have already voted Article 50. And what I want to do is, after we finish all this, we can go back to it and decide which articles we want to continue to have an interest in and which articles we just let the selectmen handle. Okay, parking expenditures. Has that been, has the budget been updated since the numbers that you sent to Charlie and I?
No, there's been no updates. We have a new contract for maintenance and collection that I included in that budget. So there may be some slight tweaks to the budget before we ask for final passage, but that document that I sent you should be generally close to final. So if
Okay.
we want to, I don't know if you have a subcommittee that wants to meet and go over it, we could do that, bring it back, or however you best want to handle it.
We know we do that.
I'm sorry?
We've done that in the past, the parking budget. So.
Under your, okay. Why don't you deal with Charlie's people? And again, we'd like to try to finalize this before the last week in March. Okay, collective bargaining. Now, the only contracts that are still outstanding are the two police unions. What's the status? Do you anticipate we'll have a contract to vote on?
What's your level of confidence on that?
I would be surprised if we did.
Okay, so it's ongoing negotiations.
Correct.
Okay. Now, most of the rest is pretty straightforward.
Can I talk about 60? Is that
Oh, yes, missed that, sorry. Okay, Article 60, Appropriation Transportation Infrastructure Fund.
So this is a new sum of money that we receive under some state law that was passed, I believe, 2 years ago. So there is a fee collected every time a rideshare service is taken, and the town or cities and towns where that ride generated gets half of that fee. So we actually received $25,813.30, and it has to be appropriated to be specifically spent on what you can see in here, for a public purpose substantially related to the operation of transportation network services in the town, including but not limited to the Complete Streets program. So, or also in other programs that support alternative modes of transportation. So we're going to ask town meeting to appropriate that full amount that we received, that exact amount, and use that to implement permanent bus rapid transit in East Arlington on the Mass Ave corridor based on what we piloted last October. So every year we'll get this sum of money and then have to independently appropriate it for
Okay.
some matter that we developed to use for, to have that funding
Okay.
be used
So
for.
right now, this is sitting in a fund.
Correct.
And what was the exact number you said?
25,813.30, I think.
Okay, so if we don't appropriate it, it continues to sit in the fund.
Correct.
Because I always advise people is not to put the dollar figure in the warrant article, but.
Yeah, I don't know why Doug did that. But
I'm sorry?
I don't know why Doug did that.
I think because we got the check, it's been sitting around.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, okay, so, questions, John?
Just a quick one, Adam, any word from Cambridge as to whether they're going to extend the rapid transit down Mass Ave? Or are we just gonna hit a wall when we hit 16?
So it seems as though their efforts for bus rapid transit are focused in other parts of Cambridge. They remain very cooperative about the pattern of the signals at the intersection, but I frankly don't know that they have the space to do it in the same way that we do because of the bike infrastructure they've built up on that portion of Mass Ave. I mean, I'm not a traffic engineer, but I don't know that they have that readily available space. I will say though, the numbers show that the time from Arlington Center to Porter Square, on average, did go down by 5 to 7 minutes with just our pilot being implemented. So it did. I mean, obviously the bus did slow down again when it got into Cambridge, but it didn't eat up any savings that we created on the Arlington side.
What was the?
I don't know that. I don't have that number as readily available in my head, but we have that number. I can get that.
Other questions? Now, I think this was always the fear. What was the impact, if any, on local businesses?
I guess I'd be hard. So there was a lot of angst before we implemented it. We didn't end up closing off any parking in front of any of the businesses that have morning hours outside of the bait shop. So many of the businesses that were very concerned to start were no longer concerned based on where we implemented the pilot lane. I do know that the bait shop initially had some concerns, but I don't believe those concerns lingered as the pilot went on and people parked where they had to park to go access the bait shop.
Okay. Now, I noticed when we set it up, there was a lot of police officers, stretched along there. Do you anticipate that there will be, will this 25,000 be going to pay extra officers in that area?
So we're going to try to do one of two things. Either operationally use some of this money to put out cones every day so that we can create the physical barrier that we created, as well as paint the ground to create a visual sort of symbol of what's happening there, or just paint the ground and reallocate the existing time of one of the parking control officers in the morning to patrol that stretch of road. That's what they do in Everett. They have a parking control officer with a vehicle, and they just sort of drive up and down and sort of like a sheepdog chase people out of the lane if people are breaking the rules about cars going in the lane. So we're either way, there's going to be a significantly less police presence than there was,
Okay.
and we're still trying to figure out exactly what the best implementation would be.
Questions? Okay. most of the rest. Appropriation, resignation. Harry Barber program. Okay, special education,
Recreational.
free cash. Okay, appropriation cannabis mitigation stabilization fund, which we didn't submit.
Oh, yeah, we gotta change that too.
Not that we're ashamed to submit it, but didn't do it as a matter of fact. So, we passed the 3%. There's two 3%. One is the one we passed last December in the special town meeting, which I think is a general fund
That's a
receipt.
tax, yeah, exactly.
Okay, and then you've got up to 3% for a period of years as a mitigate impact.
Exactly.
Okay, so will this be that second?
Yes, and town council has recommended that we adopt this to protect ourselves against any audits or sort of investigation that the Cannabis Control Commission might do to make sure that we're spending the impact fee on mitigation. So he sees this as sort of a safety net of being able to collect the impact fee, put it into a pot of money, appropriate it out for actual mitigation, so that we can very clearly state how we're spending the money for those mitigation-related issues.
Okay, so it would have to be, just like any other stabilization, it's a majority vote to put it in, 2/3 vote to
get
take it out.
Yep.
Questions, Alan?
And just history, what we passed covers both medical and recreational cannabis?
So medical has no tax,
Okay.
but we currently have a host community agreement or community benefit agreement with the medical operator. So they're already paying us. They just opened up a couple months ago. When there is, or assuming there would be an adult use facility, that would have the impact fee and the excise tax.
And that tax has already been passed?
Correct. Correct.
Okay, John?
Yeah, is there anything in the statute that defines what we can spend the money on in the mitigation funds? Or defines in any way what mitigation?
I don't think there's very clear definition. Our general understanding is public health and public safety related issues, so utilizing some of these funds to offset the loss of funds that's actually discussed in the budget a little bit of the substance abuse and mental health grant we used to get from the federal government could be one way. Supplementing, if we think it's necessary, supplementing any police supervision of the sites as they get off the ground. I think that's where our head is at in terms of what we might use the funds on.
Okay. Any other questions on this? Okay, and let's see, stabilization. And the last two articles are Indigenous Peoples' Day and parking exemption for medical and hardship, which we're very, we'll let the selectmen handle those.
Thank you.
Okay, now, what I want to do afterwards is go back to the beginning and start taking votes. Either we're going to let the selectmen handle it, we're going to recommend favorable, we're going to recommend no on it. So are there any questions on any of these issues? Or we're going to decide to vote at another date. Any other questions on any of these issues? Yes,
So
Alan?
on the budget, tell me if I'm out of order here. In the budget book, there's a $25,000 for the New Guard legal defense. Is that to replenish the legal defense
Yes,
fund? So
yes.
go into that article.
Exactly.
So we'll take that up where we usually have 0. Okay. I suppose we should ask about that now. What do you anticipate spending that on? What's the current status? What's the time frame as this is going to play out?
So the time frame has been very hard to pin down, but we're still before, we're now awaiting a decision of the Housing Appeals Committee on the dispute over whether or not we're at the 1.5% land mass calculation that would give us safe harbor status against 40B. So we expect by the fall, late summer, fall, we would have a decision. If we're successful, that would, think the developer could still appeal that to Superior Court, so that would be the next step. If we are unsuccessful, they would then be able to go forward with their application to the ZBA. Whatever the outcome of that ZBA hearing would be, could very likely result in a denial of a permit or a permit issued with a lot of conditions that are unsatisfactory to the developer, where they would then go back to the Housing Appeals Committee to protest that. So we're still years in dealing with this. So I think the next thing we would spend money on is either, if we are successful in the current appeal, defending that, or if we're unsuccessful, getting ready to advise the ZBA and then defend the ZBA based on whatever it is that their decision would be.
What is the status of the funds you, if I remember correctly, we appropriated some funds a year or two ago. What's the status of the funds you have?
They're gone.
They're gone?
Yep.
Okay, and we don't anticipate, is the $25,000 you're looking for what you anticipate spending over the next fiscal year?
Roughly, yes. Yeah. The timing makes it hard because things could slow down such that we don't spend any of it or speed up faster than we think and not have enough. Town council has supplemented the first $25,000 with some spending out of his general legal services budget to bridge that gap. But yeah, in general terms, because of how long these things take, it's been hard to be precise by the exact amount we need for each fiscal year.
Questions on this issue?
Well,
Peter?
my understanding is this would be a warrant article not in the, probably for the special town meeting.
Do we have the legal defense?
Miscellaneous appropriations.
Yeah, it's,
That's what it was before.
Yeah, Article 66. Yeah, Article
yeah,
66.
it's appropriation miscellaneous. Last year, legal defense to appropriate a sum of money to replenish the legal defense fund established under Article 13 of Title I of the town bylaws. And we've always, for as far as I want, appropriated zero because you didn't need it. So that's where you'd see this being appropriated.
We're talking about something else now. I thought we were talking about the new car defense.
Well, that's where we put the money.
That's the article under which it would appear.
Yeah, I mean, I can verify with Doug that he's comfortable with that language, and if not, we could file an additional article in a special town meeting. But I sitting here tonight, I would think we would try to do it under that article.
Okay. So let us know if there's something wrong with that. Okay, Charlie?
So are we giving any serious thought to negotiating with these people and trying to get a lump sum payment for some school addition or community center or something useful for the town?
So I think we generally understand that in the long term, negotiating with them would likely be in the best interest of the town because of the strength of 40B for developers. But at this point, in terms of the board, select board's opposition, the community opposition, negotiating right now is not something that at least I've been empowered to do.
Other questions? Okay, are there any other questions on any of these issues?
Thank
Okay, well, gentlemen, thank you very much for coming.
you.
You're welcome to stay,
I'm
but
going to
it is not required.
say a couple of things very quickly.
Okay,
I left revised budget pages and personnel pages for the legal department and town manager's department because of changes that subcommittee members have noticed or departments have noticed about their budgets that need to be changed. And I left them off, I think Liz has them or Dave, David has them. And then I also have summaries of what those changes are, the particular lines, which I will also leave with you folks. And it will be my intention, as if we find things that come up, at the end of every week, if there's anything else that we notice, I will send it off to Liz and to you so that you can adjust things, and I'll send updated pages. And I would ask the same back from you. If you, in your meetings with department heads, notice there are things that need to be changed in the budget, to please notify me directly, and I'll leave to you how you do that in your structure.
Okay, so if you see changes and you could send them out electronically to Liz and she'll distribute them.
Yeah.
At the same time, I ask every person submitting a budget, if we make changes here on the floor of the Finance Committee, please the next day notify Sandy of those exact changes, so he, for his own records, and notify the controller. So all the records match. So, any other questions? Okay. Again, thank you very much for coming out.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, now, what I want to do is go through each of these articles, and if the Finance Committee is perfectly happy allowing the Board of Selectmen to just continue its work on this, that's fine. So we can do that. We can also say, I want to give it some more thought, and we could decide this at some point in the future. I encourage you not to, we don't want to put off too much into the future, obviously, but that's an option too. Or if you're ready to vote, yeah, we think it's a great idea, or we're opposed, we can do that also. So let's go back to Article 35, which was the first article.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jack.
Okay, so Article 35 and then Article 50 was the Airbnb, for want of a better term, to use. And this is to set up regulations on short-term, which I think they have some authority to, some broad authority to do. The manager's already said under Article 50, which is the established short-term rental impact fees. The selectmen have already voted favorable action on the fees that are allowed, and they are, as the manager said, general fund receipts. So, does anybody want to get involved with short-term rental regulations, or shall we allow the selectmen to deal with that? Dean?
I move that we pass back to the Selectmen 35, and that we piggyback on their endorsement of 50.
Okay, so you're basically Article 35 to let the selectmen handle that. Okay, and that we endorse their recommendation on Article 50.
Second.
Yeah, and make it clear so they can continue to have the motion on the floor. We don't argue it out.
Finance Committee supports the recommendation of the Board of Selectmen.
Yeah.
Okay, any second? Okay, discussion. Okay, take a vote. Let's do two votes. Article 35, let the selectmen handle that. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, it's a selectmen article. Article 50, to support the recommendation of the Board of Selectmen, voted favorable action on implementing the fees that we're allowed to get from the impact fees. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so FinCom supports. So Liz, when when you're starting to work on the FinCom, Finance Committee supports the recommendation of the Board of Selectmen. Okay, now we go to Article 38. Now the tax deferral, for a couple new people, tax deferral, as Dean pointed out, very few people take. Basically, if you are under certain income limits, I don't know if there's a wealth limit too, but if you're under certain wealth limits, whatever they are, you can request that your taxes be deferred. And the taxes are deferred, and then when you move out of the house, condo, whatever it is, the condo is sold, the town has a lien on it, they get back all of their money plus interest. Now, last year, the interest rate was reduced from a fairly high number to
Like 4 1/4?
Yeah, to a more modest number. Because the purpose of this was not to punish people who didn't pay their taxes. The purpose was just to get a normal economic factor. So at some point, we'll not lose any money. We'll get all the money, it just might be 10 years or 5 years from now. So do we want to let the selectmen handle this? Or how do you want to do that?
I'd say selectmen handle
Second.
Okay, so the motion's been made and seconded to allow the selectmen to handle this article. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
I had a question.
Opposed?
Hold on, he's John.
Wait a minute, I'm sorry.
I had a question. Operationally, are there any impacts? Who is the person in the town who enforces the lien? Are there ever situations where, maybe due to an estate disagreement or something like that, that a lien isn't necessarily collected? Can that happen?
No, it cannot.
Can't
So a
close.
couple things. So yeah, that's where we're going. So operation from a cash flow perspective, because these deferrals have been in effect for so long, on a macro level, it's a zero-sum game. So what you'll
Staff was my question, not
person on the treasurer's office?
person in the treasurer's
It's
office.
not.
town
No, it's a
treasurer.
little time thing.
Yeah, okay.
And then when you go into a deferral, the treasurer's office will lien the property, like pretty quickly. And state statute requires that when you're settling up the transfer of a property and you're clearing the title, the money that goes to the town has to go first to the town.
Okay.
So we have the ultimate senior priority of any liens and creditors. We actually are ahead of the mortgage company on it.
So it's interesting because as Dean pointed out, not many people take advantage of this because they always want to leave the money to their children. Maybe that'll change if we make it a little looser, but I don't know. Okay, is there any other questions? Okay, so all in favor of letting the selectmen handle this issue, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, selectmen. Let's see, Articles 43. This is the means testing.
A local circuit breaker.
Right, so it's a local circuit breaker, establish property exemption on a circuit breaker. Now this, on the other hand, I guess really overall has no financial impact on the town. It just means some people pay less and other people pay more. And the selectmen, anybody wants to make a?
Let the selectmen handle it.
Second.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded to let the selectmen handle Article 43. Discussion.
Well, it just seems like, to some extent, it depends on the numbers. If the numbers are such that only 5 people take advantage of it, there's very little impact. If the numbers are such that 5,000 people take advantage of it, so we can let the selectmen handle it.
They know how to do math.
Moving target, too.
Well, it's yeah, you're right. It's where the numbers play out. Anybody know the percentage of people over 65 in this town?
See, that's just it.
It's,
I
now
know
it's
one of
down
them.
to 20%. It used to be 25%, but now it's down to 20%.
20%. Okay, so,
And then it's means testing.
and then it's means tested after that. So probably, well, 43,000, 10, 40, so say 7,000 or 8,000 elderly, senior. Can't remember which term I want to use now.
But it could be thousands.
Well, also-
It could
If
be.
it was a really attractive program.
Yeah, and then depending on the means testing, so it could be 1,000.
It's sort of like a split tax rate.
Yeah, in effect.
And that would be homeowners that qualify
Right.
too, not
Only
just
homeowners.
residents, owning home rights.
Yeah.
Property tax, yeah, so it would just be home, condo, whatever.
Right, even a smaller set
Yep.
of population.
And I'm assuming that 43 would also include 44, so,
It's a different thing.
That's a different thing.
okay, that's true. Why don't we just do 43 then? All those in favor of letting the selectmen handle 43, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay.
That's the other thing, what's this?
Now 44 is a surcharge exemption from CPA. What do you think?
I
opposed to this. I don't know if you wanna make it a
I'm in favor.
finance committee opposed to it. It's
Yeah,
kinda-
I think it goes back to
Goes
the
too far.
select board. I mean, we don't approve that, it's not an operating, CPA is not an operating budget. We
Mhm.
endorse it, we review it, but it's not a core service of the town.
It doesn't affect the general fund.
Right.
Right,
Okay, somebody want to make a motion?
And when we send it back to the select board.
second.
Discussion. Okay, all those in favor of 44, allowing the selectmen to handle this? We're allowing, let the selectmen handle it. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay,
Isn't it more like not helping the selectmen handle it, something like that? I don't know if it's.
okay, now, Article 46. I think what we should do is ask the Commission on Disability to come before the group. So, Liz?
I have a problem to that.
Okay, so that'll be a hearing. Now, Article 47 and 48 deals with the cable. One establishes the fund, the other is a budget. Now, we're not going to see the budget until mid-March, but we could decide at that time. Charlie?
Yeah, the budget may come in mid-March, but the money can't be spent if this doesn't pass. So I move we accept both Articles 47 and 48.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second motion.
What's the motion?
I motion that we, I move that we accept both Articles 47 and 48.
Recommend them.
Recommend them affirmatively.
Second.
Okay, any discussion?
48 will need a number attached to it.
Right.
It'll be a line item in the budget.
Okay.
Okay, it'll be a line item.
Right, we'd have to get that.
Because presumably the license fees are part of the revenue line.
Right,
now.
so it'll balance, should have no impact
It
on
has
the.
no impact
Yeah.
on the general fund, basically.
Okay, discussion, Dean.
Can I just make a friendly amendment to Mr. Fosket's motion on 48, which is that when the chair gets the number that creates the zero sum, he just puts it in, and we don't talk about it again. Because it's just a zero sum number. So when we get a number, we'd have to revote it. And I don't want to have to revote it.
You accept? Okay, that's a friendly amendment. So any further discussion?
Question.
Yes.
Who's gonna write the vote for 48?
I will basically ask the manager to, the town council to Article 47 to put that together, and then ask the manager's office to put together both articles. And we just put them in our FinCom report.
Yeah, I don't see any reference to this in the manager's budget book, so we have to make sure that it's in both revenues and appropriations.
Yeah, we'll have to balance that out. Any further discussion? Okay, motion is made favorable action on both 47 and 48. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, unanimous votes. On 2/13/19. Okay. Now, exception of local option taxes. Last year, every single year that I've been chair, one of my last calls is to Marie Kapelka, just to make sure all the articles are reported on. Last year, I forgot to make that call, and the selectmen thought we were reporting on acceptance of local option taxes, and we thought they were reporting on it, so we had to do a quick report. Now, I don't know of any local option taxes. This is catch-all. Something comes up at the last minute. House Ways and Means Committee says you can do this if you vote to accept. I don't know of any, I don't think the manager knows of any. So my recommendation is that we vote no action. And if something comes up, we'll come back to you with it.
So moved.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any discussion, any questions on that? Okay. All those in favor of no action, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. 13, 19. 50, we've already voted to support. The parking benefit district and the operating costs. I gotta,
We'll report on that.
oh, that's right, you were gonna report on that, good. Okay, so that's, collective bargaining. Just to get this through, going from the sense, why don't we do a no report at this time? I think that's how we've done it in the past. There's only 2 unions out. We don't have any agreement. So when we go to our report, we could say there is no report at this time, and I had a comment that says, you know, if any collective bargaining agreements come up, this issue will be revised. So does that sound like a reasonable course of action?
So moved.
Okay. Second?
Second.
Okay, so moved and seconded for no report at this time. I'll put the usual comment in. Any questions, discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, unanimous. 2, 13, 19. Okay. Budgets will hear, or are hearing, capital budget. Excuse me. And, excuse me. Capital budget will also do the rescission article. Okay, so Article 60. You heard what the manager had to say. This is to appropriate $25,813.30 for the, I'll get the wording from the manager if we approve this, for the implementation of the rapid bus transit in East Arlington operational costs. If we don't appropriate, the money sits there, so.
So moved.
What's the will of the committee? Annie?
So I move we support the appropriation.
Okay, is there a second to that?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Alan?
I would just recommend before this becomes a final warrant that they remove the 25,000. Based on, and this is a draft.
Yeah.
And then the number goes in our recommendation.
To appropriate. I keep saying this, I don't know, the moderator doesn't seem too concerned about it, but I always think these articles should say vote to appropriate a sum of money.
Because somehow the 25,000 is going to sneak through, you know, and then we're stuck.
Okay, call Marie, delete 25, Article 60. Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor of the appropriation of $25,813?
John has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, John?
It sounded like your motion was that we approve to use that $25,000 for the East Arlington bus transit. But I thought what the manager said was, we have to appropriate it to this fund, and we're thinking about using it for the rapid bus transit. So
Vote to
I
appropriate
just wonder
received by the town.
if I heard that correct, and whether
To address the impact of
the motion should be different.
I think the money is already in the fund. And
Yeah, it is.
that we're actually appropriating it for use as stated.
Okay, maybe so.
Yeah.
His language was, we're thinking about using it for this, which led me to believe it was
Well, what I can always do.
I don't have a disagreement with it either way, I
Yeah.
just wanted to be correct.
What I can do, first of all, is, if the committee votes favorable action, we could do something like, for the implementation of the rapid bus transit in East Arlington or any other,
Projects deemed necessary.
transit projects. And, I'll bounce that out to see if that was his intent. If it's not, we'll come back to the committee. Okay, anybody else? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous? 2, 13, 18. Now, okay. Okay, committees and commissions will do later. Well, one thing we could do now, since the issue has been put before us, is I believe it was $25,000 for the legal defense fund, which is earned under Article 66 miscellaneous, for the use on the Muger issue.
Are you sure that's the way we did it before?
I think the way we did it before was a reserve fund transfer, if I remember correctly. We were up in the
There was a
Lions room.
there's a warrant article that enabled it the first time.
Memory serves me right, I think we did it both. One time we did the transfer, and one time we had a warrant.
Well, if we had a separate warrant article.
I think we had to transfer later because it wasn't enough.
Okay, that could be.
Yeah.
Well, tell you what, in following my usual pattern of responsibility, Peter, could you touch bases with the manager's office and town council and see how he wants to handle this?
I've talked to we've talked to town council about this already.
Oh, okay.
That's what I'm speaking of.
Okay, so what did he say he wants to
They
do?
didn't seem to be up to speed.
So you think the council wants a separate article?
I'll check with them again.
Okay, if you could follow up and confirm, and then if you think town council wants a separate article, obviously it'll have to go into the special. Okay, so we'll let that go. Water bodies, I think we have coming in.
That's another one of the number that might want to get rid of, 67.
Yeah, okay, let's see. I think that's about it. I think we've got through an awful lot today.
The 7,500 in the Harry Barber article too. Another.
Okay, we could do that.
Good idea.
Which article is it?
69.
We have people coming in, Harry Barber, on the 20.
Liz, do we have people coming in?
We do, but it was mentioned that this was the same amount as last year, so did she really have to come in?
I don't think so.
Okay. And the other thing is on.
I think we've always had them come in because it's a separate warrant article, but,
I did speak with her, and then on page 207 of the budget, there's a senior citizen commission service program. That's the same thing as the Harry Barber. For some reason, it's twice.
Oh.
7,500, I spoke with
Okay.
them.
look, I think if it's not, it's silly to have people come in for the same article and hear the same presentation we've heard in the past, so, Dane?
I move 7,500 under Article 69.
Second.
Okay, so I've heard a second, so moved and seconded, appropriation of $7,500 for Harry Barber. For our new people, this is Actually, the finance committee was there. This doesn't apply just to taxes. It's a straight fee that they get. So it applies to renters as well. And to the finance committee was the one that pushed that. And I think they can get up to $500 or something in that range. So any discussion, any questions? Okay, all those in favor of $7,500 under the Harry Barber program, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, favorable action, unanimous. 213. Okay, so Liz, why don't you call them back, tell them that we appropriated the money, they don't need to come in. I'm sure they'll be heartbroken.
But you wanna get the $7,500 out of the warrant.
Right.
Well, it's
That's what they recommend.
yeah, it's the same same recommendation. Okay, so Harry Barber is off your February 25th on that. Anybody see any other articles? Can you get out of the way? Well, it's 10 of,
We
so,
have to go back to item 1, reviewing the minutes.
I'm sorry?
We have to review the minutes.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear
We've
you.
done the minutes. Yeah.
Minutes. Okay, the minutes are all being forwarded to you now. We are not killing trees. You have to kill your tree. If you're going to kill a tree, you have to do it yourself. The minutes are before you. Are there any corrections? Dean?
We have to update the date of the meeting. It's that, November 1.
All right, I'll do that.
Thank you.
Okay.
So it begins.
Okay, any other corrections?
Yeah,
Alan had several changes that I
Just
put in.
typos.
Item 8, unfortunately, it was of the 4 candidates in training, only 1 graduated.
Oh, what was that?
Item 8, the third line, says of the 4 candidates in training, 3 graduated,
Oh, yes.
only 1 graduated.
Oh, I have it backwards.
And then the several retirements are expected. I think that actually applies to item 9. I think the police department only had Chief Ryan retiring. So the several retirements are expected. I think that's actually the fire department.
There's only one in the police?
Yeah. Big one.
Okay, so several retirements are expected, are to be taken out of police and put in fire?
Yeah.
The fellow that graduated, is he coming to Arlington?
Hopefully.
Is the one who graduated?
Yeah.
I think he lives across the street from John Wallach.
Well, he probably is.
I think John knew the guy that made it, not one of them that didn't.
His last
Okay.
name doesn't have to be Hughes, does it?
Are there any other corrections? Okay, I just have a, under 1, on the front page, Tosti, he reviewed the FinCom calendar, urging subcommittees to report by the middle of March. Could you take out middle of March and say as soon as possible?
Didn't you say first week in April?
No, how about the first week in March? Okay.
That's weeks away.
Okay, warrant review. In the second line, the chair walked the committee through a draft warrant article by article. He assigned someone working with Diggins to arrange for a hearing. I wasn't quite sure of that wording. It seems, I think it's, he assigned Diggins to arrange for hearing, or the executive secretary to arrange for a hearing for all appropriated articles.
Well, the second sentence refers to Liz also, that's why the 2.
Okay. But I'm not quite sure he assigned someone.
Well, various of us have,
How about if he assigned members
all right.
working with Diggins? Okay, and under, this is just under 9 at the end, under fire services. The chair requested the subcommittee to track overtime budgets to help plan reserve fund plans. I hate having the same word twice in one sentence. So could you say, to help plan reserve fund transfers? This is on the basis that anybody actually reads the stuff, but I think they do sometimes.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Do I have a motion on the minutes?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded to accept the minutes as corrected. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Done.
Move to adjourn.
Yeah, I suppose it's a little late to do budgets right now. Okay, we got a lot done tonight. Now, we are not having our meeting we're not having a meeting Monday because of Washington's birthday. We will have the CPA committee coming in at 7:45, so please be here by then, and then, because that usually takes a good hour, and then please have budgets ready to do if possible. Even if you're getting small ones out of the way, let's do it. Any other business? Okay, meeting is adjourned.